totally on point. I need to up my game because your background is substantially better than mine.
We just redid this recently. So this is my gym and my clinic is only 12 months old at this stage, but the clinic, I redid this wall. So it's just this wall that looks like that, and I have shelves and stuff and all that stuff there. I saw a guy on, I just kept recording videos and there was shadows behind me and stuff, and I had a white wall, and I saw this guy, Noah Kagan.
Yeah.
He did a video on his home office. So it's like the home office or the home setup of $100 million CEO.
Yeah.
And the video was in his home office, and he had his home YouTube studio, and he said, I just walk in, I sit down and I press play and everything is set up, and he has like Google Home, and he just says, hey Google, turn on the studio, and he's able to sit down and record a video. And I was like, oh, I would love that, because I have so much resistance. I want to record videos, but like sitting down, getting the lights set up,
oh yeah,
it just wrecks my head. So I just did this. I have my tripod there, and I just move my computer out of the way and press play, and that's all I do. And it looks way better now, and it's much easier for me to make videos.
Nice, dude. I like it. Yeah. I need to do a total overhaul here in this room. I've like bounced rooms in the house a couple of times, and so now I just need to like settle and paint and do some stuff and actually up my background game a little bit here. But dude, David, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We've done this once before, but for people tuning in, maybe don't know who you are, can you give them the quick rundown on, who you are, what you do, all that fun jazz, and then we'll dive in and talk a little bit about the knee today. I think we're gonna talk about the knee pain. That's just something that I feel has become more and more prevalent and popular.
Yeah, it's been popular for me for a long time because I had knee issues for so long. So that's kind of why I'm in this business in the first place. People will hear my voice is a bit raspy today, so I had a rough weekend and rough week of it. Background. One thing I haven't done in a while is actually background, talking about myself on a podcast. Basically, at the moment, I work with people in the kind of rehab worlds, pain and performance worlds, and we kind of help bridge the gap between those worlds for people. And sometimes then we just continue to train athletes after they're done with that rehab process. Sometimes they stay on with us, but most of the time we just pass them elsewhere or get them back to their sport, or back to, if they're recreational athletes, back to wherever they want to be. And yeah, that's I'm fairly confident and comfortable in that niche, and I don't need to go into like direct post-op world or too far into the performance world or anything like that. I'm pretty comfortable in the niche that we do with rehab. And that's kind of where we've been for a while now. My original story was just a frustrated athlete who kept getting injured, lots of knee issues and Achilles issues and hip issues and all of this stuff. I just kind of went and tried to figure it out. Basically got some pretty terrible advice over the years from people who are supposed to be some of the best in the business, and looking back, it's disappointing the things I got told, but that was where the industry was probably at the time, and that was, people were probably doing their best. As hard as I've kind of gotten over it, I've gotten the chip off my shoulder about it, but they were probably doing their best, but it just wasn't great advice I was being given at the time. So kind of traveled the world and just went around and did all different things and learned from different people, and lots of really, really smart people. And then that kind of, I suppose, led us to where we are at the moment. And we do a mix of a lot of online work. We have some programs, then we do online consultations, and then we have a membership site, and yeah, some one-on-one work in person as well. And I train a few athletes longer term, but I don't really have much space to take on many others. So we have a little bit of a team around us now, and everything is going pretty well. And here I am talking to you.
I like it. That was good, dude. That was a good pitch. It's funny, I actually feel like we have such a similar story there, because the reason I got into this originally is because I just felt like the traditional, or at least the strength and conditioning model that I got taken through as an athlete really let me down and failed me, because it was just chronic injuries, like multiple back injuries, joint issues, shoulder issues. And I was just looking at this framework, and I'm sitting there saying, there's got to be a better way to do this. Like, I should be able to train and be strong and jacked and fast and powerful, explosive, like all that stuff that you want as a field sport athlete, without just chronically being broken down all the time. Like there's a gap, right? There's something missing. And it was like that essentially sent me on a decade plus long journey. It's like, go work with Eric Cressy up in Boston, go work with Mike Robertson, go work with Bill Hartman, all these people, because I'm just like trying to absorb as much as I can from them along the way. Because I'm like, it seems like you guys are doing things very different than the other 95% of the population that like I was exposed to. So I need to figure out what it is you guys are doing. But I know today we want to kind of talk and focus more on the knee because, you know, for whatever reason, maybe it's knees over toes guy. Maybe it's the fact that he went on Joe Rogan and Joe Rogan gets, God knows how many downloads his podcast gets.
Not as many as you.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Joe texts me all the time. It's like, dude, how can I up my podcast game to be like you? I'm like, man, you know, you just got to put in a little bit more work. But I feel like we've been getting a big influx of questions around the knee. And we talked about this a little bit off air to where, you know, I always feel so bad for the knee joint because it gets so much blame and criticism and focus, when in reality, it's not like the knee's fault per se, because it's only listening to what's happening above and below it. Like, we got to look at the foot and ankle, and we got to look up at the hip, because those are the things that are going to dictate what's happening at this more or less kind of like a hinge joint, right? And so what I would love to kind of chat about here, if we think about, you know, if you want to call it knee health or knee performance, with your experience, what are some of the biggest rocks that you see kind of go awry? Like when people come to you with knee pain, what are some commonalities you see? Obviously, there's going to be specific situations, and it's just like there's always an individualized component to it. But I think that there is usually a generic 80% that tends to kind of be common amongst, you know, a larger population.
Yeah, there is, I suppose, because, well, there's different types of knee pain and different types, and even when you categorize the different types of pain, still no one's experience is the same, because no one's experience, at least we don't know if it's the same, because how do you describe pain? It's such a hard thing to even describe in the first place. So how do you know what I'm describing is the same as what you're describing? So that's a very difficult thing to, that's the hard thing in the pain world. You know, so what I say is a 8 out of 10, you might say is a 2 out of 10 pain. What I might say is a dull pain, you might say is a sharp pain. We really don't have much, we just don't have good language to describe this. The good thing is, for me at least, with most injuries, most issues in the body, I'm not particularly interested in the pain itself. I'm just, the biggest thing I'm looking for, and this is different with everyone, is their story. So like how you got here in the first place. What are the big things that happened in your life along the way that led you, or, you know, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be too serious about it, but like what led you to being here with me at this point? What was your training history? What other injuries have you had along the way? And basically you're looking for some little piece of information that say, okay, here's some things that stand out to me. Here's you tore your hamstring or you tore your calf, and then you went back to playing sport, and 3 months later you have this chronic knee pain that hasn't gone away now in the last 12 months. So straight away you're probably starting to think, okay, maybe them tissues aren't doing such a good job there, and we need to re-educate them tissues, strengthen them again, and start to rebuild that. So that could be one thing. Another person could have broken their ankle. Another person could have, sounds weird, but they could have had like some dietary issues going on in the gut or something like that at the time, and their whole body just tensed up as a result, and they've lost a lot of fluidity and movement around the rib cage and the pelvis and the femur and all this stuff as a result. Another person might have, they had plantar fasciitis, or they stubbed their toe or something like that, and that changes how they roll through the foot in the gait cycle. There's a million things. Another person, sometimes it could be just habits, like they literally came in touch with a trainer who told them that they always needed to squeeze their glutes when they do everything, and that just kind of closed off the back of the hip and the posterior capsule. There's no ability to get that flexion through the hips. And when you're starting to miss that, then you're just kind of being pushed forward all of the time, and you're missing a lot of good stuff that should happen in the gym and when you go for a run or anything like that. So there's so many things, but for me the key thing is just trying to find what's missing in someone. And if you have that mindset towards looking at any injury, what's missing, what are they not doing well here, then that's quite an empowering thing, because you're suddenly taken away from, right, here's the knee joint itself versus what's all the rest of the body doing, what's going on in their training. It might just lead you to, the answer might be just looking at someone's program and saying, you're actually not doing any calf work here whatsoever, and you just put in whatever 10 or 20 sets of mixes seated and standing calf raises every week, and suddenly knee pain is gone. So I'm just interested in what's missing, and we can dive into what's commonly missing if you like, but that's where my starting point is, at least.
Yeah, I think that is a really good background and framework for people to keep in mind. We talked about this a little bit off air too. Like, podcasts are so hard because there is such an individualized nature to this. Like, every human has such a unique story that got them to the point they're at now, and then like we're trying to put out information here that 1,000 people can listen to and just generically kind of be like, can hopefully find something that's going to be helpful they can implement on their own. And then it's one of those deals, well, if this generic stuff doesn't help you, then maybe you come talk to us, because then we need to actually dive into the weeds on you. But like the pain realm in itself is such a complex world, right? Like, there's like the sensation and experience of pain is incredibly nuanced. It's not as simple as I think a lot of people try to make it out to be. I think if people listening are interested, there's a phenomenal book in this realm called Explain Pain by, was it David Butler and Mosley? Yep. And like just that book in itself, which is so well written, and like they do such a good job with the drawings, that's at least like a nice small step in the direction of beginning to appreciate how much is going on here and just the experience and sensation of pain. But yes, what I would love to do, if we can talk about what are some of the big rock common things you see missing with respect to the knee when you talk knee health or performance or whatever language we want to use.
Okay, so usually there is some element of loading involved, right? So we're just going to take that off the table first, because a lot of at least people who are listening to your podcast, like, they probably have done some training in their life, right? They're probably not a granny just sitting on the couch, so they've done some amount of training. So there's usually some element of loading involved, where if they have a bit of pain, but it's because it's while they're doing an activity. If they just sit on the couch, they might be sore, but it's still because like I've been doing activity, I've been pushing myself every single day. If I just sat on the couch for a month and didn't do any hard training, maybe my pain would go away. For some people it wouldn't, but maybe it would, or at least it would be a lot less. So there will be some element of load, but we're just going to take that off the table. Where I would start with is just like I would start with any other person. I would just look at range of motion. So I'd be looking at the hips, the pelvis, the feet, the what the femur can do, the resting position of the bones here, and then the movement availability of the bones. So that would be like passive and active range of motion. That's what I'm looking at. Then I'm also looking at kind of a low tolerance type of thing, and the ability of the tissues, particularly posteriorly, to contract synergistically together. So you might see people using one of my exercises, which is a foam roller bridge. That's kind of a treatment and an assessment, to be honest. So you can put someone into a foam roller bridge, which is basically lie on your back, put your feet on the foam roller, the arches of your feet, or you can go on the ball of your foot, little tuck your pelvis, lift your hips off the floor, your knees are a little bit bent, and you just stay in that kind of longer lever bridge with your not a straight knee, with a slightly bent knee, and you're pressing down through the ball of the foot or the arch of the foot, depending on the person, and you're just kind of trying to actively plantar flex down into that foam roller. What that's going to do is get the foot to be active, the ankle to be active, the soleus and the gastrocs and the distal hamstrings, and then you're going to get some proximal hamstring and just a little bit of glute, and you won't get too much back extensors if the back stays nice and low. You don't want to go up too high. So you're basically assessing by doing that someone, and then you want to see them be able to go on to a single leg and hold it for at least 30 or 45 seconds. Most people with knee pain can't do that. To be fair, most people can't do it at all in the first place anyway, so they're just not strong enough. But most people, certainly with knee pain, they just can't do it at all. Like, they go onto a single leg and they're gone. Whether that's an inhibition thing because of the pain, maybe some of that is definitely part of it. But a lot of the time they're just not strong enough there. And some people will ask the question, and it's a fair question, as to why, like, okay, is it a strength thing purely? And it maybe not, because a lot of these people can go and do a lying hamstring curl and then a load of calf raises, and they'll be really strong in each of those exercises individually, but as soon as they try and get these muscles to contract synergistically and co-activate together, they don't have any ability to do that. And that is interesting to me, because when we go and walk and when we run, these muscles have to contract together to help to stabilize the knee in place, particularly in running. You want to see more of an isometric around the knee joint when the foot hits the floor, and you don't really see much change in knee angle at all actually when we go for a run. If you look at a video of any good runner, any good sprinter, the knee is pretty much in an isometric contraction. The muscles around the knee are pretty much in an isometric contraction, particularly like you're looking at gastrocs, median, lateral, distal hamstrings and the quads, and that then allows the hip muscles we get more of an active hip extension from things like the glute max and stuff like that to push us forward. When people can't do that, they're not strong enough, or they can't coordinate those tissues well enough, you see like a slightly wobbly, you might not even see it, but either they'll sink down into their knee too much, so they go down into too much knee flexion, or else their knee straightens back too soon. Either way, it's kind of the same issue, which is the energy is not being transferred around the limb effectively and efficiently. And so maybe the knee joint is just getting kind of beaten up a little bit as a result. Because if you look at the anatomy that's set up around there, and you look at the tissues and you try and understand the architecture of these muscles, then you'll see biarticular muscles. So rec fem is crossing there, the gastrocs, the distal hamstrings, these kind of long, thin muscles with long, thin tendons, where you see that, you can see, okay, these are designed to transfer energy from the hip down to the foot. They're kind of designed to pass the energy through the knee joint. The knee joint is there to there's movement available there, but we want a lot of, and I don't like the word, but I'm going to use it anyway, is stability. We want a lot of stability there. So that's something that I will check very quickly or straight away with someone. You can just use an exercise like that, and when you see that, okay, the target here is 45 seconds, at least 30 seconds, and they literally can't do 5 seconds, not at all, then that's probably my first place that I will go to. And even if that's not what caused the issue, the root cause, which I don't even like again using those words, because we'll never know what the root cause actually is when it comes to pain. That type of giving people that feeling of those tissues contracting together seems to give their brain some kind of sense of, maybe it is stability, where it's like, okay, we have muscles here that we can use and we can stabilize the knee. And it does make you wonder, because a lot of the time people stand up, they go for a walk and they feel better, and yeah, maybe they've warmed up a little bit, but they feel better the next day again, and every day they do it, they feel a bit better and a bit better and a bit better. And it makes you wonder about why, because in 2 days it's not fast enough to build strength. So 2 days, like, we need a couple of months to really be able to build like any significant amount of strength in these tissues. So it's more of a neural patterning thing, I think, where you're starting to rebuild this connection between these tissues and this inter and intramuscular coordination. So that kind of coordination between the tissues, I think, is not the biggest thing necessarily, but the biggest thing initially to check off with someone and start to give them back to them. And I do see massive changes there. So I'll stop that soliloquy there for a second before I keep going further.
No, yeah, I think that's really, obviously 100% spot on. And it's really interesting to see, I think, the difference in context for people, where like they have such a hard time getting like the positioning, the coordination. It's just like, by changing context, it totally changes their capacity to actually, coordinate contractions and essentially orient themselves in space appropriately, right? Because like, you can take someone that deadlifts 500 pounds. It's like, I know that you're strong. Like, you can't deadlift 500 pounds unless you have some, juice in your legs. But then we change the environment and we have you do the exercise like you're describing, or even like a really watered down version, just like a 90-90 bridge on a wall. And it's just like, right? Like we're all over the place, you know? It's like you get them to kind of like, all right, now like reach your butt pockets, reach your knees up to the ceiling, and they kind of finally get a little bit of a posterior tilt. We kind of get those ribs coming down a little bit, and like they start shaking like crazy, right? And it's not so much like, I don't know, it's weird, right? Because it's not really like a strength thing. It's just they have a really hard time getting into that position and then managing that position in space.
It's a position, it's a sense thing, it's a foam roller bridge is more definitely a lot more strength involved than that stuff.
Yeah.
It's a tissue that seems to be inability to have an inability to contract efficiently in that joint position and in that joint angle. And like, I don't like, you know, some people will push the agenda on the powerlifters where it's like, oh, you can't even do this bridge and you think you're strong, but they are like lifting a shit ton of weight. They are strong. Do not get that twisted. They are strong, a lot stronger than the person who's probably saying that. Definitely a lot stronger than me. So it is a position specific thing, but it also does maybe show like here there's a bit of you're probably missing something here. And when it goes back to the exact thing that I said at the start, when I find something that I think is missing, and not a random thing, which is like anyone can find any weakness. This is FRC does this. It frustrates me a little bit where it's like you see FRC trainers, and this isn't I don't want to be a knock on FRC. I think some of that stuff is good, but like it's like I put you into the most shortened position in your hamstring and I ask you to pull your heel to your butt in the most shortened position and you get a cramp, and I use that as proof that you are really, really weak in this angle and you should train that joint angle. I don't mean it like that. Anyone can find any easy way to prove to someone, oh, if you put your elbow in this position and I push on you, you're weak there, so you should train that. Not so much. I'm talking about meaningful positions here, meaningful joint angles, meaningful, like not extreme end ranges, just ranges that you should, I think, have some ability to get into and get some contractions there.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, right? Because it's not that hard to sit around and like try to poke someone and just tear them apart. You see that in so many different realms, whether it's the movement realm, whether it's the programming realm. It's like, it's not hard for me just to like throw the gauntlet at you and be like, oh, look at all these things you suck at. Like, here are the issues, is what we need to fix. But so I think we have this co-contraction thing, right? In that single leg or double leg foam roller bridge is a really great, you know, diagnostic that people can do for themselves at home. And I'm sure you have a YouTube video or on your Instagram. Like, I've seen that exercise literally all over the place. Granted, you're probably going to find like 37 other people doing it that have just taken it from you. So you'll be able to find it if you just Google like a single leg foam roller bridge, I'm sure. But definitely one using as kind of a self-assessment, self-diagnostic on yourself. And then two, something that's highly worth putting into training, right? Like, even if it's something that you do on the back end of your warm-up every day, just so you get more repetitions with it. You can do it at the end of a lift. It's great to prep with before you go run, obviously. So I think that's kind of a big rock, big bucket, number one. What would be another big thing or another big place where you look?
Yeah, so that's a big one, and it's an easy win. That's why I like it. It's such an easy win. And you know, with some clients, sometimes you have to work hard to convince clients that like this is what, you know, especially with the breathing stuff. Like, I spoke about this on our membership site the other day, like ways to build buy-in with the breathing stuff. Like, sometimes you have to be real smart and sneaky and sneak it in. Foam roller bridge, you don't have to be sneaky. I've never had to be sneaky. Doesn't matter if it's an Olympic athlete, a professional rugby player, an NFL player, or a 50-year-old woman, a 60-year-old woman, a 70-year-old woman who's never ran before. You do a foam roller bridge, they feel it, they feel those muscles contracting, and then you say, you feel that? You need to get better at this. And they're like, I agree. There is no questioning. There is no buy-in needed, right? It's done. Simple as that. The next big thing, or a couple of big things, is definitely looking at the hips, definitely looking at the feet. But the second quickest win after a foam roller type of thing, bridge type of thing, is looking at the movement of the shin. I talk about this constantly on Instagram. People kind of think they understand sometimes what I'm saying, and they try and do it and stuff like that. I'm not so sure, but we look at the shin, and we look at how the shin travels forward and backwards in space and rotates in space. such a big deal. Now you can go, and this is where like a plus for the FRC stuff. They do like knee cars where they do like tibial rotations and stuff like that in the open chain. I think that stuff can be really, really nice as both an assessment and a treatment. If you have someone with like a really, really cranky knee joint and they don't even want to really load onto it, they can't even walk up the stairs or anything like that, give them some knee cars and just open chain tibial rotations. It will make them feel a lot better, and it will also like bring some awareness there and just get some movement in there. That's also an assessment. Can you actually get some rotation in your shin? And then seeing where the shin angle is in space when they go and move and do whatever movements, that's a really big deal. We basically want to see someone that can transition through the gait cycle, which you can equate to a lot of exercises in the gym. Some people like to do that, some people hate that. I find it to be quite useful to be able to understand that, and you can basically break it down into 3 phases of the gait cycle is the easiest way. I think kind of more of a heel strike, mid stance, and then toe off. And then you just like the easiest way to think about those 3 phases of gait is seeing like a negative shin angle, and then you're moving towards that more vertical shin and a positive shin angle. That's what you're going to see as you pass through the gait cycle. So a lot of the time with a knee issue, people are struggling to get that shin to travel forward and backwards in space, which couples with the rotation that you're talking about then in the tibial rotation stuff. So this is why the knees over toes guys stuff can work for some people and can feel quite good for some people. I think it's much less about building VMO strength and this magical muscle that he talks about. I think it's much more that they're just actually bringing the joint through range of motion. Now, it's also why half the people get better when they do a program like that, and half the people end up with worse knee pain or never had knee pain and then they have knee pain, because you're bringing the joint into extreme ranges of motion, and you need to do that in a smart, progressive way. And that's not to say he doesn't do that. It's just some people that do the program won't do that. They won't listen or whatever. Yeah. I don't know the program, but looking at them shin angles and looking at how people, what movements people do when they do their squat, for instance, like do they just kind of sit back into a hinge and the shin just stops at a certain point and the hips have to keep going or something like that. Looking at when they go for their walk, are they actually able to transition their shin forward and back in space like that? And that couples then with what's happening at the foot, because if you're able to transition the foot or the shin forward and back, positive and negative shin angle, you're going to see a tibial rotation, and you're going to see pronation and supination at the foot. If the shin doesn't actually move that much, which you would be surprised how you wouldn't be, but a lot of people would be surprised how little movement they actually get from there, then you're not going to see much movement at the feet. You're going to see feet that are locked up, either in more pronation or supination, but it doesn't matter. The answer is they're not moving through range of motion. So that's where I will go to. Now, why that's happening, maybe that is an issue that's happening more proximally, so I'm really locked up at the rib cage and all of that has to travel out distally from there. It does. There's no in my mind, there's no doubt about that. But whether we have to wait and clean up all of that stuff proximally, like clean up the rib cage, clean up the pelvis, I do it with clients because I think I would be robbing them of like just feeling better in their body if I didn't. But I don't wait until I'm not a proximal to distal guy. I just go to where I feel like I need to go, that I can get the biggest improvements in the fastest way possible. So I think going after that shin and starting to teach it to move negative to positive, external to internal rotation, supination to pronation at the foot, just changes people's whole feeling of their whole lower body and their knee very, very quickly if you do it in a smart way. And some of that work paired with something like the foam roller bridge. So the foam roller bridge can be cool because it almost like desensitizes the knee joint, where I do a couple of sets of it and it's like I've just burned the hamstring tension into my brain, and now it's taken some sensation away from the anterior knee. Now I'm able to just transition that knee joint, whether it's a step up, whether it's just a kind of a knee forward and back motion, whether it's a squat variation, whether it's a step down, it doesn't matter. I'm just looking for that shin movement and that experience of the arches can load and unload again.
Yeah, I really like that. I think some exercises in that realm, like this is where you take, basic exercises, say like a lunge or a step up or a step down, and the exercise just may not look sexy, it may not look fancy, but these are the things that are going on underneath the hood when we're prescribing these exercises, right? Like there is a real reason that I'm giving you this besides just, hey dude, like let's get bigger quads and a bigger ass. It's like I want to actually see this tibia move through space, right? Like if I give you a split squat or a lunge variation, that lead leg tibia is going to have to move through space. I can have you go forward. I can have you go in reverse. We can do step ups. We can do step downs. There's just so many ways there to actually start getting that thing moving in space. And then obviously the nice part about that is you can't do that without tying in what's going on at the foot also, right? It's like those exercises tend to be like really nice big catch-alls, which is why we use them all the time. Which is why I think most people listening to this at some point in time in their training, like we talk about this all the time, like you need to get on one leg, you need to do unilateral activity. That's not to say you need to take out your big guns, squat, bench, deadlift, etc. But like there need to be repetitive or at least exposure throughout your program to unilateral activity, because that is what's going to actually translate significantly better to what's going on when you're on one leg in space performing gait or other things along those lines.
Exactly. And so the foam roller bridge and stuff like that, that's promoting, again, I hate the word, but like stability. You're thinking on the stability side of it, because you're talking there about synergies. You're talking about not co-contractions in that exercise, but you're thinking that might transfer over to co-contractions of the agonist and the antagonist when they go for a run. Then the shin work, you're talking more relative motion. So you're trying to increase the motion at the joint. So they're kind of doing the opposite of each other. But the funny thing is they complement each other so well, because it can desensitize an area and then I actually have a chance now to move through more range of motion. So they can really couple well with each other, even though in theory they're doing the opposite things. Moving the heel bone is something that people don't talk about a lot. It should, because it should couple with that shin movement as well. Like if you look at the calcaneus and everything is just basically stacked up above that. Mm-hmm. You will find it hard to move your shin around in space if that heel bone doesn't move at all. It should move more than most people think it can, and it sounds kind of like an arbitrary thing, but sometimes it's hard to describe this stuff on a podcast, and until people actually feel this stuff, it's hard for them to understand how important or how good this stuff can feel. But actually getting that shin to move forward and rotate and getting the heel bone to move on the floor, for it to move on the floor, you need to have it actually heavy on the floor first of all. I'm not a guy who's always, some of the people who come from the PRI world, everything is through the heels. I'm not like that. I don't agree with that. I think some of the time that's important, but it is definitely important to get some weight in the heels and be able to, especially get like that eversion and inversion of the heel. Mm-hmm. You're going to start to unlock a lot of movement at the hips and at the knee and the foot if you can do that. So that is important. Giving people an understanding of that, where I can get that pressure, is really important. With regards to the co-contractions, what you're going to see is people, the further forward I get in the gait cycle, the more everything locks up, right? So earlier in the gait cycle, I have more room for movement earlier in the gait cycle. So there's just a little bit more room for wiggle through my joints, okay? Further I get forward, the more everything needs to stiffen up. So if you think about say I'm doing a Zuma wrestle with a big guy, right? If I'm leaning into him and I'm trying to push him backwards, I'm going to be on a very rigid foot behind me. Both feet are probably going to be a very, very rigid, locked up. My knee joint, I don't want it to move. I don't want my hips to move. I just want to put force into the ground and try and put that force into him and push him back. If I'm on a spaghetti foot at that stage, it's not going to work. If my foot is flopping around, if my knee is flopping around, if my hip is flopping around, the force is being dispersed at my joints and not going from the floor into him. So if you think about that, that's a toe off position, and everything starts to lock up because I need to be able to push and propel myself forward. If you take it back to mid stance and then you take it back to earlier stance, I have more options the further back in the gait cycle I come. So when you see knees like that are very cranky all of the time, very little movement, hips that are have very little movement, they are probably more forward and are probably trying to push against a sumo wrestler all the time. They're in that propulsion all the time. We can bring them back, which might require doing some ribcage work, doing some pelvis work. Mostly more than any of that stuff, I just try and give them an experience in an exercise, in a simple knee forward and back exercise or a lunge or something, that they can start with a negative shin angle, so the knee starts from behind the ankle and then it can transition forward. I think that's probably why these things are helping people, you know?
Yeah. I think like the sumo example there, and that end phase of gait at toe off is really good and interesting, because really what we're describing there is extension, right? Like when you're at toe off, we're essentially at some level of systemic extension, right? That extension at the foot, extension at the knee, extension at the hip. It's extension all the way up the chain. And that's where we need that extension to take place, right? Like you need extension if you want to be able to generate force and be powerful. That's why I hate when we get like so much dogmatic people like attacking extension like it's evil. It's only a bad thing if you can't manage it and get out of it. Like if you're just perpetually, as you mentioned, if you're always pushing against a sumo wrestler, if you're always, we'll just air quote this one, always extended, always propelling forward in space, and you can't get out of that, that's when we start to run into some issues long term.
I said this somewhere else recently, I value extension so much that I don't want you to be there already so you can move there. That's all I talk about when I talk about extension. I don't care how much extension you are in. I just want you to be able to get into extension. That's it. So I don't know how much is too much. I just need you to have some room to go there. So to have some room to go there, I need you to have some room to come out of there. That's all. Just enough variability. When I think of extension, I think of just co-contractions everywhere. So the whole body around the spine, the ankles, the knees, the hips, co-contractions everywhere. This is what you see in people who have lost a lot of movement, is co-contractions everywhere. And we need to get rid of them. There's just muscle activity everywhere. You cannot relax. So relaxing is so important. Some of the time I think the breathing work just works to get someone lying on the floor. Not necessarily because I'm doing all this funny ribcage stuff, just because they get a chance to chill out and settle down and their spine gets a chance to kind of fall into the floor or whatever. So just relaxing, taking away that chronic tension on the agonist and the antagonist at the same time, and just having a chance to take joints through range of motion again, take muscles through range of motion. Like these things don't have to be super complicated, super complex. Just give people what they don't have.
Yeah, a couple I think really important points there. One, this is like, it's a joke I always tell people. It's like it's hard to extend on something that's already extended, right? So it's like we got to get you a little bit of flexion so you have something to extend into. And then I think, that point there about the co-contraction is so important, because just conceptually, like if the body doesn't feel, safe in space, whatever you want to call it, the only, real tactic and strategy it has is just to essentially fire every muscle it has around that joint to try to stabilize that. Again, that word comes up again, but to try to stabilize that joint, right? So like we have to somehow give an input or a signal to make sure that, the brain essentially perceives itself as being safe in space, so that we can get those muscles just to cool down a little bit and give us some room to actually start to play and learn and just kind of, reprogram, if you want to use that language, in terms of like how we orient ourselves in space as we move. And then I think that the third big point there and this is like a theme that comes up all the time. This is why I like doing podcasts, because you talk about so many different things, but you kind of like get these nuggets and themes that come up all the time again. So it came up when we talked with Mike Robertson. It came up when we talked with Ty Terrell and a few other times. It's just this idea of trying to fill the empty bucket for the person that's in front of you, right? Like, what's the empty bucket? Find that thing and fill that thing. Because if I can fill your empty bucket, if you can fill your own empty bucket, that's going to give you your biggest ROI return on, time investment. And that's maybe where like the true value of a coach comes in, because the coach finds the empty bucket really fast and knows how to fill it. When you try to do it on yourself, it's kind of like a shotgun approach. So it'll probably work for some of you. It probably won't work for all of you, though.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the if you're willing to put aside your ego, which can be hard, and not like we want to be real fancy sometimes and say I have all the answers and stuff. If you just look at someone's training program sometimes and just what is missing in there, what have you not done for so long, or even better, what are you just doing way, way, way too much of? Let's just strip that back a little bit. I don't want to change too much. I don't want to change 100 things all at the same time because I won't have a clue what worked. Let's just take out whatever variation you're doing and try this variation instead. Like I said earlier, let's put in some of your calf work instead. Let's give you a couple of foam roller bridges before you go and squat and see if that helps. Maybe I can give you 2 or 3 sets of a breathing exercise. Some people are saying you don't have time to do that. There's an obesity epidemic in the world. Don't do breathing exercises. I'm sorry, you have 2 minutes to do a breathing exercise if it makes someone feel better and move through a range of motion. You have time to do it. The bigger issue for the obesity epidemic is if people get in chronic pain and they can't train anymore, or they feel like they can't train anymore. Let's keep people healthy and look at things from a longer term point of view. Other people, what's funny, which is almost as a rehab professional, it's a little bit contradictory to my thought process, right? Because I'm always looking for evidence and proof that you're ready to move on to the next stage. I'm very aggressive with my rehab with people, very, very aggressive, but I always need proof that you're ready to move on. So I won't get someone to run until they can prove to me that they can do some kind of plyometrics, some kind of continuous hopping type of thing. I'm not alone in that. That's a very common type of thing. But other people will just go for, okay, you can do 1.5 times body weight back squat. Now you're ready to run. I don't see any correlation or any link between those two movements whatsoever. So I am always looking for proof. I want proof to know that you can move from this stage to this stage to this stage to this stage, and I'm very systematic with that. But sometimes what's weird is someone can have knee pain and they can go and start to do plyometrics, and it seems like that can be the tonic that they need for whatever reason. I don't know, but maybe it's because, especially if it's more extensive plyometrics and like pogo hops and stuff like this, maybe it's because it starts to stimulate the ankle and gets the foot, like you're not thinking about getting off the floor as fast as possible and short ground contact times. Maybe you're just allowing them to feel that floor. The foot is able to yield a little bit. It's not just all about overcome. And you start to train this ankle, you start to train this calf, you start to train the co-contractions around the knee joint. But the key thing is they're getting a chance to relax in the air, then they're preparing for contact, they're making contact, they're off the ground again. That can help, but that could also flare the life out of someone. Like, so it's not something I would just throw someone into, but I have seen this weird stuff helping. So sometimes there is no necessarily rhyme or reason for this stuff, but again, maybe it is like, okay, they were just missing these kind of plyometric type of contacts in their training, and their body just appreciated this kind of faster lengthening and shortening of the tissues and the pre-tension and actually I would just call it more a reflexive movement. That's what they appreciated, more reflexive movement, a movement where I didn't have to think about anything. I was just doing it and my body was organising. So that can be really, really cool, but I wouldn't suggest people just throw people with knee pain into that straight away. You should have at least some proof that they feel like they're ready for that, unless you're like to take chances with your clients, which I wouldn't be a big fan of.
Mm-hmm. David, this has been fantastic. This has been such a fantastic conversation. Really glad that we got to get you on here and do this. I think there's a lot of nuggets and takeaway for people listening, which is always one of the hardest things in a podcast, is trying to not keep it 100% theoretical and give them something to walk away with. Like, go do the foam roller bridge. Like, if you take anything away from this episode, I think with all the stuff we talked about, the easiest thing for you to go do for yourself is that foam roller bridge. Try it on 2 legs. If 2 legs is easy, try it on 1 leg. You now have something at least to start putting in the direction of, both assessment and training. So, for people that have listened here and really enjoyed the episode and would like to come, find you and what you do and a little bit more about you, where can they do that?
yeah, and go and do the foam roller bridge. And I don't want to make it into like this is the exercise. Just for an example, just feel something, right? They can find me. Best place is probably Instagram, David Gray Rehab, GREY, and if they like my stuff there, they can find. I will sell them other stuff from there, but we have a membership site where we talk about movement, and I do a couple of videos every week and break down different things for people, and we have some programs and stuff there which I think could definitely help with a lot of people's knee pain. So lower body basics is one that I think 8,000 people have done now, and there's a lot of, to be honest, I don't want to be like a catch-all, this will help everyone. It probably won't, but it will help a lot of people, and everyone learns something from it. So that's definitely a good place to go with knee pain. Basically, I put it together. It was like when I couldn't take on any more clients, it was like, okay, here's the things that I would probably do with most of my clients, and I'd like them to be good at all this stuff even before they came to see me, and in most cases they're not. So that's where they can go, and excuse me, my voice is going. That's where they can go and check some of that work out. And I really enjoyed the chat as always, and I'm looking forward to catching up again soon.
Appreciate it, man. Everybody listening, thank you as always for tuning in. Have a absolutely beautiful rest of your week, family. Talk soon.